A 911 call came in on the morning of January 12th, 2019, from a home in Winter Park, Florida. A wife tearfully informed the operator that she thought her husband was deceased and it could be a heart attack, but she wasn't sure because he was lying in a pool of blood. The twisted case that unraveled following the investigation proved that the truth really is stranger than fiction. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 40 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyr, and I'm here with my co-host, my baby daddy, and dad of the year, Jonathan.
Hi. Darklivity. It's the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness bring to light.
I actually cannot believe it's almost the new year, and we have had this channel for over a year now. So much time has gone by. Mazzy is already about 6 months old, and I hope everyone is gearing up for a fantastic holiday season. And by the way, if you have any ideas for the new year, videos you'd like to see, things you want us to do any differently, let us know. We're also going to make it easy. You can do hashtag Darklivity 2025. I'll put the hashtag up here. If you leave that hashtag in the comments, we can actually click on it and we can see all of your suggestions right away. Also, I wanted to showcase, these were the custom shirts that we gave away in our giveaway. This one was for my channel, the Festival of Fears, and John's.
This is mine.
And he created both of these designs. And he did such a good job. So our winners, Natalie and Allison, you will be getting those if you haven't already. So I hope they're not seeing it for the first time here, but they turned out really, really great. I can't wait to do it next year. Okay, so let's get into today's case. In this episode, we are going to delve into the case of Michael Redlick. He was a well-respected executive, devoted family man who was found dead in his affluent Winter Park, Florida home under very mysterious circumstances. The investigation quickly spiraled into a very tangled web of conflicting narratives, shocking revelations, and a chilling truth that left everyone questioning, who can you actually trust? So join us today as we explore the intricate details of this case, from the very complicated and even questionable relationships that unfolded behind closed doors to the intense scrutiny that followed, all leading to a very stunning courtroom verdict.
Michael Redlick was born on May 1st, 1953 in Cleveland, Ohio, to Julius and Helen Redlick. He graduated from Ohio University and later went to law school. He had a successful career as a sports executive, working with the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Browns, and eventually the Memphis Grizzlies. Michael was only 65 when his wife of 17 years, Danielle Redlick, called 911 to report that he was dead, saying she thought he might have had a heart attack.
Now, I really do like to take everyone's feedback into consideration, and I heard you or read you loud and clear on Sarah Boone's video, our very last one, that you don't really like to hear a lot of audio, but at the same time, there is going to be some that we cannot leave out in this case. We have to paint an entire picture for you, but we will try to keep it to a minimum and only include things that will add to the story, not take away from it. So we are going to be playing a part of this 911 call, so let's listen in.
911, may police call your medical? I don't know. I think my husband's deceased. There's been a tragedy at my home. What's the address up there? 1231 Temple Drive, Winter Park.
What's going on at 1231 Temple Drive?
I believe my husband is deceased.
Okay. And why do you believe he's deceased?
Because he's stiff and he's been wounded. He might have had a heart attack. I don't know.
So you can hear a tearful Danielle telling the 911 operator that she has reasons to believe that her husband is deceased. But there's a plot twist. This woman waited over 11 hours to call 911.
I can see that red flag.
Exactly. And that is what they were thinking. But it is a bit confusing. The operator asked Danielle if she had just found him like this, but she tells her, no, it actually happened last night. And now the operator's confused and she's like asking, okay, so it was a heart attack that happened last night, then he went to bed and you're finding him the next morning type of thing. But again, Danielle's like, no. Instead, she claimed something else may have caused his death, a stab wound.
But she said it was a heart attack.
I know. She's saying that the stab wound caused a heart attack, or she thought.
Okay, so who stabbed him?
According to Danielle, He did.
He stabbed himself.
He stabbed himself. I know it's confusing, so let's listen to Danielle explain it to 911.
Okay. Did you just find him?
No, actually, it happened last night.
It happened last night?
Correct.
Okay. How old is your husband?
He's 65.
So did you find him this morning? Because I know you said that you believed it happened last night. Did you see him last night? Was he okay or was...
He was not okay last night. We had altercation, and he stabbed himself, and I ran into the bathroom, and then when I came out, I tried to help him, and I saw he was lying in blood. And then I tried to help him, and I couldn't. Correct, yes. And then I tried to help him, and I woke up with sitting up next to him, and I've been trying to figure out what to do.
Right. I got you. I'm going to get you some help, hon.
So they had an altercation. She ran and hid in the bathroom, and then she came out to find him lying in blood. So how did she try to help him, but also leave him there? It is very confusing, but what we've gathered from this pretty shocking 911 call was that the two of them had an altercation the night before. And during this altercation, Michael had stabbed himself. And then there was blood everywhere. However, Danielle believed he died from a heart attack. During the remainder of this call, Danielle admitted that Michael had been drinking the prior evening and that she didn't know what to do when she discovered that he had died, which delayed the call by a whole 11 hours. She explained that the evening prior, she left the house with her children, who were 15 and 10 years old, because of Michael's erratic behavior. She had her children spend the night at their friends' houses to allow Michael to cool off. She told the operator she believed that the stabbing may have just triggered this heart attack because he had heart disease. She described it as a shoulder wound. But to know how we got here, we need to go back in time because Danielle and Michael have a very interesting and some would say concerning backstory. He is her stepdad, but he's also her husband. Yeah. So John, why don't you take us back so that this will make a lot more sense?
All right, so like we said earlier, Michael Redlick was born on May 1st, 1953 in Cleveland, Ohio. He graduated from Ohio University and later went to law school. With his law degree and a master's in sports management, he built an impressive career in the sports industry. He held senior executive roles with big-name organizations like the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Browns, the San Francisco 49ers, and also the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He also served on the executive committee of the National Sports Forum. In 1996, Michael's life took a significant turn when he met Kathleen Aquino. Their connection was deep and genuine, and Michael fell in love with her. The only challenge was that Kathleen had been diagnosed with cancer, and her prognosis wasn't good.
But as you said, Michael was in love, and nothing was going to stop him from loving Kathy, not even cancer. So eventually he decided to marry Kathy, but he had another reason, health benefits, because her current insurance wasn't covering a lot of her treatments. But if they got married, his insurance, which was a lot better given his career, would allow her to get the medical care she so desperately needed. It was the purest form of love. When Michael met Kathy, he also met her 3 children, a daughter Danielle, who was 22 at the time, and her 2 younger siblings. Danielle described the whole relationship between Michael and her mother as spontaneous after the couple learned that Kathy had been diagnosed with aggressive stage 4 breast cancer. Less than a year later, in 1999, her mother died, leaving both Danielle and Michael grieving.
And at that time, 22-year-old Danielle was working as a bartender, and 42-year-old Michael, who was 20 years older than her, would come in to visit. What started as him offering comfort eventually shifted as he began making promises of concert tickets, job opportunities, seemingly building a connection between them. But after Kathy's death, the relationship eventually became physical.
Yeah, like at first he was just trying to be the normal stepdad, kind of like building a relationship with Kathy's daughter, but it was a confusing time after Kathy died. It left Danielle feeling conflicted levels of shame and self-loathing. At first, she justified it as helping each other through the grieving process, but later, Michael asked Danielle to move in with him and help raise Danielle's 2 siblings, Michael's new stepchildren. Later, Danielle admitted that she found Michael to be sophisticated, worldly, exciting, and intelligent. Their biggest hurdle was when the relationship continued to the point of Michael asking Danielle to marry him. Now, she did hesitate because she knew that it would be difficult to explain to her family that she was going to be marrying her stepdad. Given the age difference, her family was concerned that Michael may have manipulated and coerced her into this relationship.
But after dating for a couple of years, Danielle got pregnant, and the couple welcomed their daughter, Jaden, in 2003. Michael and Danielle did get married in 2005 and later had their son Sawyer in 2008. Despite their unconventional beginnings, they built a life from that. From the outside, it seemed pretty normal. Michael's career continued to flourish as he became the vice president of corporate sales and sponsorships for the Memphis Grizzlies. And during his time there, he boosted the team's endorsement revenue, negotiated a naming rights deal with the First Tennessee Bank, renaming the arena's club level to the First Tennessee Club. He also launched programs to retain and reward season ticket holders and created cross-promotional opportunities for local businesses to partner with the Grizzlies.
Despite his professional success, those closest to Michael knew that his priority was always his children, Jaden and Sawyer. Working in the sports industry meant extensive travel and frequent relocations, and this was something Michael felt placed a strain on his family. He wanted a more stable life where he could make a difference and create a better future for his children and others. So when he failed to get this big promotion with the Grizzlies, he thought about the best decision for his family, and after much deliberation, he moved them to an affluent suburb of Winter Park, Florida, where he took a job as a faculty member in the DeVos Business Sports Management program at the University of Central Florida.
Once Hurricane Katrina hit, the UCF's DeVos program traveled to New Orleans every August to help rebuild through the Hope for Stanley program, and Michael was the first to volunteer. Michael's passion for giving back extended beyond these trips. He mentored students as they organized events like the 4.9K Rainbow Community Run, marking the anniversaries of the Pulse nightclub massacre in Orlando. One year, the event raised nearly $100,000 under Michael's guidance. Students and colleagues at DeVos described Michael as encouraging, humorous, and straightforward. Red, as Michael was affectionately known on campus, challenged students to think beyond immediate goals, encouraging them to broaden their perspectives and aim for careers with global impact. Michael's colleagues noted that he often turned conversations towards his children. Richard Lapchick, a colleague, recalled speaking with Michael daily in the office. He said most of our conversations were about Jaden and Sawyer. You see, Michael's pride in his children was clear, especially when he spoke about their sports games or his time coaching Sawyer's teams. Michael's passion for helping others extended to his daughter Jaden, who joined him on a Hope for Stanley trip, working together to rebuild homes in New Orleans.
Michael brought Jaden and Sawyer to his UCF office during school breaks, where colleagues would witness firsthand the close bond he shared with both of them. Those who knew Michael saw him as not just a dedicated professional, but also a deeply devoted father. His children were his world, and his pride in them was evident in every aspect of his life. They lived at 1231 Temple Drive in Winter Park, Florida, and yes, this is yet another Florida case. This Mediterranean-style home is on a large lot close to Lake Knowles in the heart of Winter Park. It was 4 bedrooms and close to 3,500 square feet, with an upstairs loft, an open floor plan with a kitchen and family room, as well as a separate living room and dining room. The main suite overlooked the back pool area. It's everything a growing family of 4 could ever want, except things weren't always what they seemed. We know from the 911 call that there was a physical altercation between Michael and Danielle, and now Michael was dead.
That 911 call we played earlier continued beyond the part that we played, but the audio quality isn't great. During the rest of the call, the operator grew suspicious and asked Danielle why she didn't call until 11 hours later.
Danielle hesitated and then replied, I'm on probation and I was afraid. I didn't think anyone would believe me, and I was just trying to get him to wake up. I was just exhausted. So you're probably wondering why this woman is on probation.
So back in January of 2018, Danielle got into some legal trouble after a night out when it took a violent turn. It started with an argument between her and her friend during an Uber ride. By the time the police arrived, Danielle was heavily intoxicated, and things escalated quickly. In the chaos, she resisted arrest, and in the heat of the moment, ended up biting one of the officers on the hand.
Wow. So to me, this is proof right away that she can be violent, especially under the influence.
The incident left Danielle facing charges of battery on an officer and disorderly intoxication. She'd been on probation ever since, carrying the weight of that night's mistakes for over a year. Naturally, she was worried that her probation status would make her look guilty of harming her husband.
So let's take you back to the crime scene. We do have pictures of this, but obviously we do have to blur them. When the police arrived, Michael was indeed already deceased. As soon as they passed the threshold of the front door, they saw blood droplets on the tile, as well as on the inside of the door handle and down the back of the door inside. Overall, the home was organized and tidy. As a matter of fact, the first responders noticed what smelled like chemicals, like bleach or a lavender cleaner of some kind. As they walked further into the home, there was an apparent blood smear on the wall and a bloody kitchen knife on the floor in front of a door across from the stairwell. That door where the knife was found led into the kitchen.
They also found a bucket filled with a pink liquid at the bottom of the stairs, along with a vacuum cleaner, a mop, and wet, bloody towels nearby. Down the hallway, there were barefoot, bloody footprints leading to the garage. Similar footprints were found in the kitchen where a red Solo cup lay on the floor. Another red Solo cup was in the kitchen sink, along with 3 knives, a spoon, a washcloth, and some cereal stuck in the drain. One of the knives appeared to have blood on its blade. There was also bloodstains on McDonald's containers and even on the milk jug inside the refrigerator. When they entered the living room, they noticed the couch was in an odd position, pushed up toward the opening of the room, leaving little space to walk inside. There was also more barefoot, bloody footprints next to the couch. And on the floor below the archway leading from the living room to the primary bedroom, there was a thick blood smear on the tile. It looked like it marked the path where Michael's bloody body had been dragged. The smear led from his body into the primary bedroom and curved into the primary bathroom, where it appeared to have originated.
Now, those do not look like they were made by Michael.
No, not at all.
So wait, where was Michael?
So Michael's body was actually found in the back of the living room, on the floor not far from the front door, right as you walk inside the house. But we'll get back to that in a moment. Back in the bathroom, there was still water on the shower floor, suggesting it had been used within the last few hours.
So it appeared from the streak that Michael went down right outside the bathroom and was dragged into the living room where he was now lying dead on the floor. The couch was pushed back and he was lying in front of it with his arms stretched out to his sides and his legs in front of him. He had on jeans, a belt, and a pair of socks, but no shirt. Although there was what looked like it could be a shirt bunched up to the right of his body, and there was a lamp on the floor. It was upright and sitting to the left side of his head above his left arm, and blood smears that looked like handprints were on the wall to the right of his body. Very confusing scene. There's also a towel on the floor near his left leg. It's clear that a major cleanup had been attempted, leaving circular streaks in the blood trail. This was a very bloody crime scene. Blood soaked into Michael's socks, his pants, and of course, the trail. But other areas of the home were virtually spotless. I also want to point out there were 2 different size bloody bare footprints on the floor of this home, meaning that both Danielle and Michael had walked through the blood and it was tracked through different parts of the house.
First responders noticed a stab wound on Michael's front left shoulder near his armpit. He also had a scratch on his face near his left eyebrow and another scratch on his left torso. But Michael wasn't the only one with injuries. Danielle also had cuts on her wrist, but they appeared to be superficial and possibly self-inflicted, not defensive wounds. Investigators knew there was much more to the story of what happened that night. It didn't take long for them to discover that Michael and Danielle's relationship had been far from smooth. Reports revealed a darker, more troubling side of their marriage, with frequent arguments being a common theme. Apparently, Michael would become aggressive when he drank. Danielle described instances where he would manhandle her.
And one time, when Michael was still working for the Memphis Grizzlies, he hit her in the face, leaving her with a chipped tooth and broken facial bones. Danielle said that Michael took her to see the team's orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Frederick Azar, who noted injuries on both Michael and Danielle. The couple explained to the doctor that these injuries were from a domestic incident. And Dr. Azar, who could sense that Danielle was ashamed, referred her to the team's plastic surgeon. Danielle said that Michael's decision to take her to the Grizzlies physician was strategic. Had they gone to the hospital, a report would have been filed and Michael would have likely been arrested, potentially jeopardizing his entire career. Michael apologized for the incident and promised to make things right, and even offered to take Danielle out for a nice dinner. Like that makes up for it. But despite these episodes of violence, Danielle said that there were good times in their marriage, moments that made her hesitate to file for divorce. She had invested a lot into this relationship and she wanted to hold on to it. What she meant was that she could not afford to leave. She was accustomed to a certain lifestyle by then. Remember, she was a bartender when they first met. As the years passed, Michael's health began to decline. He was diagnosed with heart disease, and he also struggled with erectile dysfunction, which would affect his self-esteem and his moods. When Michael took the job at the University of Central Florida, Danielle hoped that a fresh start in the warm Florida climate would improve his mood, and by extension, their marriage. But things did not improve, and they soon began sleeping in separate bedrooms. Michael's aggressive behavior continued, and by 2018, a year before that 911 call and Michael was found dead on the floor, Danielle had filed for divorce. In her court petition, she noted that the marriage was inevitably broken. She sought custody of their 2 children, as well as alimony and exclusive use of their home on Temple Drive. Danielle was listed as an unemployed communications professional and photographer, according to the court documents. She also requested that her maiden name, Danielle Drohan, be legally restored. I actually found her old photography website. It was linked to her X account, formerly Twitter. Her About Me section said that she obtained an advanced photography certificate from Indianapolis University / Purdue University. This is like in tandem. And she started doing freelance photography, but that it was kind of a side passion of hers. In May of 2018, Danielle wrote an email to Michael that laid bare her pain and disillusionment with their marriage. She said, quote, "I was hopeful, sweet, and full of love when I met you. I really wanted the Romeo and Juliet story. I wanted a soulmate to trust, melt into, be there for, even die if it came to it, to show the depth of my love and vice versa." End quote. She admitted feeling bitter at times and blamed Michael's infidelity for their deteriorating relationship. She went on to say, quote, "Although my words may be cutting, they're only sounds. A dull knife compared to the sharp, disloyal, deceiving, phony, and never-ending selfish knife you continue to twist into my back as if it were a sport. Of course, someone would be messed up, traumatized, and may act out," end quote. We're not getting the context attached to this message that she wrote, so I'm not sure what she meant by acting up, but I think you will soon find out. And her words were deep in this email. Her pain was obvious. Infidelity is very hard to overcome, especially if it's an ongoing affair. Any betrayal is difficult to move on from.
When Danielle made it clear she wanted out of the marriage, Michael left the house and moved into a temporary place. But in November of 2018, just a couple months before Michael died, a judge dismissed the divorce petition, citing improper service of the papers. With the divorce stalled, Danielle decided to give the marriage another shot, and Michael moved back in.
According to their 15-year-old daughter, Jaden, Michael was happy to be back in the house. The Redlick family enjoyed a peaceful Christmas in 2018, a rare moment of contentment, but it would be their last. Only weeks later, Michael would be dead. Danielle would be the prime suspect, and Jaden and Sawyer's lives would be torn apart as the media descended on their story, forever changing their world. I think most of you knew that Danielle was going to be implicated.
Yes, that seems pretty obvious given the circumstances. Their fights had gotten so bad that police had been called to their home more than once. Although their relationship seemed to improve for a while, tensions started to rise again in the days leading up to Michael's death. On January 10th, 2019, tensions in the Redlick household hit a breaking point. Michael found out that Danielle had been texting a man she met on a dating app called Meet Mindful. It's an app meant for people looking for connections based on mindfulness and personal growth.
Every time I hear about a new dating app, I'm like, there's a dating app for everything now. Like if you like kangaroos, there's probably like a I love kangaroos dating app. Whatever it is, it seems you can find someone.
The messages Michael saw weren't anything over the top. They were lighthearted conversations where Danielle and the man talked about hiking, holiday plans, and personal stories. But when Michael came across them, he was furious.
Oh, yeah, it's his wife. But, he cheated before. Not that it's right for her to do it, but clearly there were deep issues in this marriage. And the discovery of these text messages sparked a very heated argument between Michael and Danielle. Their teen daughter had to step in and actually diffuse the escalating situation. And no child should have to step between their parents. That night, Jaden left and stayed at a friend's house, hoping to escape the tension at the home.
On January 11th, the next day, Michael seemed remorseful. However, Danielle claimed that his anger hadn't fully subsided. She said he sent her snide text messages, so she decided to give him space before addressing the messages he'd seen on her phone.
Well, later that evening, the family was preparing to attend a football game where Michael coached their son Sawyer's team. Before they left, Danielle was in the shower, and when she got out, she saw Michael just sitting in a chair nearby, and he looked really angry. She asked him, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I don't know. Why don't we ask Caesar?" Danielle realized in that moment that Michael must have gone through her phone because that was the name of the guy that she had been corresponding with from the dating app. So they got into an argument, and as she was getting dressed, he was asking her all kinds of questions like, "Are you effing him? Who is he?" He was just trying to get to the bottom of it, and she was trying to explain that's not what it was about. And she tried to grab her phone from Michael, but he took it. And he ran out to his car and he closed the door behind him, locking it. He was sitting in there attempting to read through all of her messages. Well, Danielle didn't know what to do, but she felt that her privacy was being violated. And in the heat of the moment, she raced into the kitchen and she grabbed a carton of eggs and she began throwing them at Michael's car. It's a Lexus. It's a nice vehicle. Clearly, he's going to care. At this point, he told her that he was going to throw the phone into the lake. But finally, after she threw a few eggs, he got out and angrily started charging towards her. But then their son Sawyer came outside and he stopped. I don't know what she thought that this was going to accomplish. Maybe she assumed that he would get out to clean it off and then she could grab her phone. Or maybe it was just a gesture in anger to retaliate against him. I don't know. But she does end up getting her phone back. Sawyer and Michael left to go to the game, and Michael told Danielle not to come. She didn't want to miss Sawyer playing, but she was too scared to go at that point. Later, she gets a text message from Michael that says, "You can come to the game." So Danielle thought that he'd finally cooled off, and she did end up going.
After the game, Danielle and Michael went back home and their son Sawyer went to a friend's house for a sleepover. Everything seemed calm, but the peace didn't last. On the morning of January 12th, Danielle called 911 at 9:30 a.m. telling the dispatcher that her husband was stiff and that she believed he had suffered a heart attack. Meanwhile, at 10:17 a.m., Danielle texted her daughter Jaden, who was still at that friend's house. The message said, "Hang there for a little while. I'm dealing with some stuff here. Best not to come home for a bit." This message stood out to Jaden because her mom usually picked her up early after sleepovers. Sawyer, who was at a flag football game at the time, found out from his coach that law enforcement was at his house. Worried, he stayed with his friend until he could figure out what was going on. I can't imagine what it would be like finding out my own father was dead.
I know, like you're just playing flag football. You're, a 10-year-old kid, and you're wondering, why are police at my house?
Right. That morning, Sawyer already had a sense that something was wrong when his parents didn't show up for his baseball game, something that was very out of the ordinary. Danielle, who had visible wounds, as we mentioned earlier, was taken to the hospital by police. While there, toxicology tests revealed alcohol in her system, which was a violation of her probation from the 2018 Uber incident. During her interview with detectives, Danielle claimed that on the night of January 11th, Michael was drunk and angry. She said that while she was eating a McDonald's hamburger in the kitchen, Michael took a bite of it and spat it in her face, which led to a fight between them.
According to Danielle, she grabbed a serrated kitchen knife in self-defense, but Michael took it from her, and then he made stabbing motions toward her. Fearing for her life, she locked herself in the primary bathroom attached to their bedroom. Through the door, they exchanged words until Michael went silent. When she eventually came out, Danielle found him on the floor, unresponsive, and she realized he had stabbed himself.
Danielle said she tried to revive Michael and look for her phone to call 911, but she couldn't find it. Instead, she started cleaning up the blood with towels. But because there was so much on the towel floor, she kept slipping in it. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she claimed she eventually collapsed beside Michael's body, asking herself, "What am I going to do?" She admitted that she later fell asleep and spent the morning of January 12th continuing to clean before finally calling 911.
I was thinking she must have been heavily intoxicated to fall asleep, or rather pass out right next to a bleeding body. I mean, the test did show later that there was still alcohol in her system. This was like hours later. During her interview with detectives at the hospital, Danielle expressed deep concern for her children. She said her primary focus was on how Michael's death would affect them and emphasized her desire to be there for them during this difficult time. Danielle noted that both of her children had bright futures and even stated they both have so much going for them. When asked what she would say to Jaden and Sawyer if she could speak to them at that moment, Danielle responded that she wanted to let them know she was thinking about them. Despite her strong desire to see her children, this was not immediately possible. Based on the circumstances surrounding Michael's death and Danielle's mental state at the time, she was actually placed under observation under what Florida calls the Baker Act. If you've never heard of this before, the law allows for someone to be taken into custody and evaluated if they're considered a danger to themselves or others due to mental health crisis. Under the Baker Act, a person can be held at a mental health facility for up to 72 hours for evaluation and stabilization. This is not an arrest, to be clear. It's focused on protecting the person and those around them while determining the best next steps for their mental health. Danielle was eventually released and returned home to mourn Michael's death with her family.
After Danielle was discharged from the hospital, she arranged a funeral and a celebration of life at a local church. Richard Lapchick, a close friend and coworker of Michael's, spent time at the funeral home with Danielle, Jaden, and Sawyer. He described the family as devastated and overwhelmed by the loss. The church service had a large turnout with over 100 University of Central Florida students and alumni from the Devos program attending to pay their respects, and another 100 guests traveled from out of town to be there as well. Richard said he received over 200 messages, emails, texts, and phone calls from people who knew Michael, sharing their love and gratitude for him. Meanwhile, detectives continued investigating Michael's death, focusing on the couple's history and the events surrounding the incident. Acquaintances of Michael and Danielle described their marriage as rocky and toxic. Some claimed it to be actually Danielle who would become aggressive, especially when she had been drinking. One person even alleged that after having 5 drinks during a night out, Danielle started throwing punches.
5 drinks is a lot of drinks. I mean, I don't know how tall or big she is, but if I had 5 drinks, I would be passed out.
Oh, yeah. Detectives interviewed Jaden, who described her mother as laser-focused and her father as more laid back. She admitted that her parents often fought and that some of their arguments turned physical. Jaden said many of their conflicts stemmed from very extreme viewpoints that both of her parents held.
So they don't see things eye to eye.
Clearly.
Then detectives spoke to 11-year-old Sawyer, who shared that he had been at a friend's house after his football game on January 11th and said when he left, his father was angry about some messages that he found on Danielle's phone. Sawyer mentioned that his parents were not in a good place at the time. He also spoke of having witnessed physical altercations between them before, including scratching and pushing. In the past, Sawyer recalled seeing injuries on his father and described both Michael and Danielle as alcoholics. Can you imagine your 11-year-old?
No, well.
What they must have seen. Finding out this information and with the knowledge of the couple's unstable relationship and now learning about Danielle's aggressive tendencies, detectives began to question her and wanted to know how Michael had stabbed himself. Finding out this information and with the knowledge of the couple's unstable relationship and now learning about Danielle's aggressive tendencies, detectives began to question her account that Michael had stabbed himself. I mean, it's kind of always seemed unbelievable.
The turning point in the case came from when Dr. Sarah Zajdowicz, the medical examiner, completed Michael's autopsy. The findings revealed an abrasion inside Michael's upper lip, bruises on the left side of his chest, and additional bruises on his left arm, bicep, and wrist. The most significant injury was a stab wound near his left armpit. The knife pierced his lung but didn't hit any major blood vessels. However, it did breach the chest cavity, making it harder for him to breathe. A vein was cut, causing severe internal and external bleeding, which was evident from the large amount of blood found at the scene. While Michael did have heart disease, the medical examiner confirmed that he did not die from a heart attack. He essentially bled out.
And this is a gradual process, and you would start feeling queasy, you would feel cold and off balance until finally passing out and then dying if you were left there. They can't pinpoint an exact time or how long it would have taken. That depends on the case. But one thing that the medical examiner did know was that his death was ultimately ruled a homicide. It was determined that the one stab wound to his upper chest, his shoulder area, could not have been self-inflicted, as Danielle had told the 911 operator. The doctor categorized Michael's bruises and superficial cuts as defensive wounds, suggesting that he had tried to fend off an attack. On the morning of February 6, 2019, at 8:30 a.m., they arrived at Danielle's home on Temple Drive in Winter Park and placed her under arrest. Danielle was taken into custody and transported to the Orange County Jail, where she was formally charged with the murder of her husband, Michael Redlick. Let's talk about the evidence that was uncovered. Well, as we said at the scene, there were signs of a cleanup, and Danielle had apparently attempted to cut her own wrists, which investigators believe showed what's referred to as a consciousness of guilt. It refers to behaviors that indicate that someone knows that they've done something wrong or illegal. That can include trying to hide evidence, fleeing from a crime scene, lying to the police, and the list goes on. A superficial attempt at taking one's own life can also be seen as a sign of guilt, suggesting that the individual may have felt overwhelmed by their actions or was trying to avoid the consequences of what they have done. These behaviors can serve as evidence that the suspect is aware of their guilt, strengthening the prosecution's case against them. So some of the other things Danielle did during that 11 hours that she delayed calling for help were the basis for her arrest as well. Like the fact that when they retrieved the data from her cell phone, they found out during those 11 hours that Danielle was supposedly hiding, locked in their primary bathroom. She had actually checked the messages from that dating app. So while her husband is bleeding out, she's messaging her hiking buddy on Meet Mindful. Wow.
Yeah, Danielle's cell phone, a white iPhone, revealed key details about the night of the incident. Data showed that she attempted to call 911 at 10:52 p.m., but the call didn't go through because she mistakenly dialed 911, an invalid number. And it wasn't until 11 hours later that she successfully called 911.
So wait a minute, she did try to call 911 when all of this was happening.
It appeared so, but maybe she was too drunk to realize it was not going through properly, or maybe she knew what she was doing and was a little smarter. I'm going to call 911, 911. I tried to call it. Oops.
And the exact thing they were arguing about, she was right back to doing once she's locked in the bathroom.
That's exactly how it looked. Danielle was held without bail, even though in November 2019, her attorney, Catherine Conlon, argued that she should be released while awaiting trial. Conlon claimed Danielle wasn't a flight risk, pointing to her strong ties to Central Florida. She also said Danielle planned to attend church services, look for a job, and remain under close supervision of an attorney involved in her guardianship. Despite these arguments, the judge denied the motion for bond.
Nearly a year had already gone by and still no trial. And then, of course, 2020 happened. No one could have anticipated how the pandemic was going to affect trials. It was February 2020 that the prosecution presented Danielle with a plea deal. If she agreed to plead guilty to manslaughter, she would receive a reduced sentence. But she declined this offer, still sticking to the story that Michael stabbed himself, despite the medical examiner's report that this was a homicide. So she was going to trial. Finally, after all the delays, Danielle's trial began on June 9th of 2022 with conflicting theories of events. So it was going to take hearing all the evidence at trial for a jury to decide what the truth was. By now, Danielle had actually admitted to being the one who stabbed Michael in the upper chest.
Mm-hmm.
But she claimed it was in self-defense. At first, the prosecution tried to argue to the judge that Danielle should not be allowed to claim self-defense now because obviously they already had the medical examiner that said the previous claim that he stabbed himself wasn't true, right? So they wanted her to stick with that story. But if she changed her whole argument, then they would have to change their entire approach. So Assistant State Attorney Sean Wiggins told the judge that Danielle had never admitted to self-defense and stabbing her husband, so she shouldn't be able to claim it after the fact. However, Catherine Conlon, Danielle's public defender, said there was proof that she had spoken to an EMT firefighter at the scene, Rodley Childers, who responded to that 911 call. Danielle informed him that an altercation with Michael occurred, and Danielle's attorney said that Rodney would be able to testify that Danielle told him Michael had pinned her, punched her, and tried to smother her that night, adding that he also noticed cuts on her wrists and a bruised elbow. So essentially, there was proof, so to speak, that it could have been self-defense. The judge ruled that Danielle could bring the self-defense argument, but the prosecution could also introduce evidence suggesting Danielle's guilt, and this included that attempted self-inflicted wrist wound. Once the initial arguments were settled with the court and jury selection had been completed, they were ready for trial.
Let's begin with the prosecution's opening statements and their take on what happened that night. Prosecutor Sean Wiggins wasted no time refuting Danielle's self-defense claim. He told the jury that Danielle stabbed Michael on purpose, not in self-defense, and then did everything she could do to avoid taking responsibility for her actions. He claimed that during the 11-hour delay before calling for help, Danielle tried to clean the crime scene. He told the jury that while Michael's body lay dead on the living room floor, she was on a dating app, Meet Mindful, checking for new messages from potential suitors.
The home that she is standing in this moment in time, looks like something from a horror movie. It is 7:22 in the morning. And Miss Redlick opens up her dating website and she views conversations that she's been carrying on. And what you'll learn about Michael is this. He's a dedicated father. He's a husband. He's a person, and like all people, has his faults. But the evidence will show at the time of the murder that the relationship, which had been terrible for so long, was one that Michael had not given up on.
Prosecutor Wiggins went on to explain that Michael had moved back into the home to try to make his marriage work, and that Danielle, who was significantly younger than him, was a stay-at-home mom who had been unhappy with her marriage for at least half of the marriage, 6 or 7 years, if not longer, that she came to the belief that Michael had been unfaithful to her and decided to file for divorce. However, he explained that she later dismissed her divorce proceedings. Instead, Michael moved out, and they had a trial separation. He was an active and involved father to their children, but he still was hoping to repair his marriage with Danielle. He wanted to move back in with his family. And we told you about this. It all happened just a few months before his death, when he returned to the marital home with Danielle's permission. They were both willing to make the relationship work again. According to the Redlick children, the relationship appeared to be less toxic at the time and improving. There had even been less fighting between their parents. But despite the efforts to repair his family, something changed for Danielle in December of 2018. She joined that dating app we told you about, Meet Mindful. She began corresponding with several men to look for a long-term relationship. This is the same dating website that Danielle was using on the phone while Michael was bleeding on the floor of their home. According to statements by Danielle to her friends, she never had any intention of remaining married to Michael. She told her friends that she wanted to be happy, which meant a life without her husband. However, before she could leave him, she needed to find someone who would be financially responsible for her. So she couldn't be broke.
The prosecutor explained that a forensic extraction from Danielle's phone revealed her search and web history from the night of the crime. That night, she was looking for new dating matches. Then, the next morning between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., she started searching for information on how to slit your wrists. By 9 a.m., she was searching for how long it takes to bleed to death after slitting your wrists. By this point, Michael had been dead for 11 hours. At 9:28 a.m., Danielle finally called 911 and gave her first version of events. She told the operator she thought her husband might have died of a heart attack, which we've already heard. Danielle's story shifted multiple times. Her second version was that Michael accidentally stabbed himself, which she suggested might have caused a heart attack. And then her third version was that she had the knife in her hand for self-defense, and Michael took it from her and stabbed himself. She claimed she ran to the bathroom to hide, believing Michael would retaliate in a fit of rage. According to Danielle, she stayed in that primary bathroom for 11 hours out of fear. She admitted that at some point she came out, saw him dead on the floor, tried to render aid, and then began cleaning up. Despite these shifting stories, the one thing that Danielle insisted on was that she did not kill her husband.
How was she in there for 11 hours if she did make a call or like an attempted call at 10 something? Well, I guess after she did that, they're saying she went back in the bathroom and then she called at 10 in the morning. So there's the 11 hours. I'm just trying to put it together. Of course, we know that everything changed at the time of trial. Now Danielle is claiming battered woman syndrome and self-defense. And we talked about this if you were here for our last video about Sarah Boone's case. The prosecutor let the jury know that there was evidence that this was not true and that Danielle's own daughter would testify against her that she was the toxic parent, the violent parent, and the instigator of all the arguments. They would present evidence, the prosecutor said, of several emails between Michael and Danielle regarding their tumultuous relationship. According to emails and text messages, Michael begged Danielle to come home one night when she'd stormed out. He said that he wanted to work on their marriage because he wasn't done living under that roof, referring to their Winter Park home. In the days leading up to his death, there were text messages on Michael's phone that were not on Danielle's phone, which the prosecution said meant that Danielle had deleted those messages from her device, which showed guilt. And they believe that this meant that Danielle had tampered with evidence other than just the crime scene. Experts would testify that Danielle attacked Michael, but that Danielle purposely cut herself and bled all over the crime scene to obscure the evidence. So to change the way things looked and kind of like muddy the water, so to speak. The prosecution believed this showed a consciousness of guilt, that Danielle realized that Michael died from that stab wound that she inflicted, and she knew that she was going to be held responsible. So she had to quickly come up with a way to cover it up, to avoid responsibility. So she chose to end her life or make it look like she was going to. But at some point, she changed her mind. And then she began a cleanup of the scene to help craft a new narrative. Instead of tampering with the scene, Danielle said that she was merely trying to clean up her own blood after she had a change of heart about taking her own life.
The prosecutor also highlighted a jailhouse phone call where Danielle allegedly denied stabbing Michael in self-defense, instead describing it as a struggle. He also pointed out that Danielle tried to avoid jail monitoring by using another inmate's PIN to make calls. On top of that, she persuaded another prisoner to smuggle out a letter which was reportedly meant to influence witnesses, including her own children. The prosecution ended his opening statements by acknowledging that Michael was not a perfect victim. There was evidence of infidelity and violence between him and Danielle throughout their dysfunctional marriage, but he stressed that those past issues didn't change what happened on the night Michael died, and that was entirely Danielle's responsibility. To drive this point home, the prosecutor revealed that while Danielle was at the medical facility under the Baker Act, she made at least 3 statements admitting that the real story was what she initially told the 911 operator, that Michael stabbed himself. Remember, they like that narrative.
Right. The prosecutors want her to go with her original story.
And this Baker Act will lead to 3 additional statements that you hear. While in the Baker Act facility, pay attention. You'll hear Miss Redlick say, "What I told the dispatcher was the truth." She'll maintain that the story she provides in that 911 call is the real story. I've already given you the real story. And she also will say something important. Miss Redlick will say, "I've already told the folks in here what happened."
While in the facility, Danielle told her treating doctors that she did not kill her husband, marking 3 official denials that she ever held the knife or stabbed Michael. The prosecutor told the jury that they would hear phone calls with the health workers where Danielle admitted that she had purposefully lied about the events. But after she was released, Danielle became uncooperative with law enforcement and was outraged that they were investigating Michael's death as a homicide. The prosecution argued that her later claim of self-defense was just another tactic to avoid going to prison.
The prosecutor also said that they would introduce a number of emails showing how volatile this relationship was. And in an unsettling message to a friend, Michael wrote, "My family's supposed to move in here in December during the winter break unless Danielle kills or divorces me first. Neither option is off the table."
Neighbors also came forward to testify about the couple's frequent conflicts. One neighbor recalled Michael referring to Danielle as crazy and jokingly saying, "As long as I keep the steak knives hidden, we'll be fine." This wasn't the only time he made a comment like that. He said it again after returning to the family home following a failed attempt to file for divorce in late 2018. Neighbors also noticed Michael's repeated departures from the family home. They saw him move in and out multiple times. Michael explained to several of them that he left the house to protect his children from having to witness the constant fighting between him and Danielle.
Okay, but everything we just told you was the prosecution's version. It was all their information about the case, and this is what they were telling the jury. But now it was the defense's turn to give her opening statement. Danielle's attorney, Catherine Conlon, said that Danielle indeed stabbed her husband in self-defense. She told the jury that Michael was the aggressor in the relationship and had repeatedly cheated on Danielle. But when Danielle began moving on with her life, speaking to other men on dating apps, and was ready to move on, it was then that Michael would have second thoughts about breaking up. It was then that he would suddenly want to work on the marriage and move back in with Danielle. She told the jury that he became angry and enraged when he saw Danielle moving on and talking to other men. And the night of Michael's murder, they got into a physical altercation in which Michael choked and smothered Danielle, preventing her from breathing.
This frightened Danielle, so she grabbed the knife from the kitchen to protect herself. When Michael kept coming toward her, she stabbed him once in the shoulder, hoping to break free and catch her breath. After the stabbing, Danielle said she was able to run from Michael and lock herself in the bathroom. She claimed the evidence would show Michael was standing and had followed her into the primary bedroom, stopping only outside the bathroom door. Blood droplets on the tile at that spot, according to her, proved that she believed Michael was fine, that the wound wasn't life-threatening, and that he was still a threat to her safety.
Danielle's attorney explained to the jury that hours later, after hearing nothing, Danielle, thinking that the coast was clear, emerged from the bathroom and found Michael's blood trail leading from outside the bathroom into the living room, where she found Michael on the ground and unresponsive. Danielle didn't understand what she was seeing. She was still in shock and confused and in despair. Just for clarity, because what we showed you in those crime scene photos looked like a giant smear from the primary bedroom all the way into the living room where Michael's body was found. But just for the sake of argument, imagine that it wasn't a blood smear to begin with. Imagine it was only a smear after Danielle tried to clean up the blood due to her intoxication, shock, or whatever the case may have been at the time. Just imagine that because that would be plausible, that it was actually blood droplets. And once she took the towels and was smearing it around, it began to look like that big, thick smear, that he wasn't actually dragged. And imagine that she had no idea what was going on behind that closed door.
The state is right. You are going to hear about the night of January 11th, 2019. You are going to hear about anger. You're going to hear about hatred. You're going to hear about rage. You're going to hear about infidelity, how Danielle Redlick knew and recognized that the danger that she was facing that night was different than the other incidents of abuse that had happened throughout their marriage.
And Attorney Conlon told the jury that the Browns' team doctor would testify in Danielle's defense, stating that he referred to her plastic surgeon and a cosmetic dentist for treatment. Conlon also brought up another incident that took place in Memphis. Danielle's sister had come to pick up her daughter from Danielle and Michael's house. When she walked in, she heard screaming and yelling. She found Michael pinning Danielle in the corner of the closet in the primary bedroom.
And then there was Michael's ED diagnosis. But that wasn't all. Michael had this preoccupation with what he was experiencing, and he was going to the extremes to maintain his manhood. It was more of an obsession by the way the attorney described it, how he started taking all of this testosterone, and the hormone was causing his personality to change drastically, almost as though it was an addiction in and of itself. By this time, they'd moved to Florida in 2014, and this is when their relationship began to deteriorate and become more violent. Michael started to take higher and higher levels of testosterone, which caused him to become sexually aggressive with his wife. One of these incidents caused Danielle to seek medical treatment in the emergency room. You can use your imagination or don't, but this was documented.
In another encounter, Michael allegedly tried to run Danielle over with his car. She reported the incident to the Winter Park Police Department, but when officers told her that they would need to interview Michael, she became worried that he may get in trouble or even lose his job if the incident was prosecuted. Because of this, she decided to withdraw her complaint.
We see this so much. It's a very common theme in relationships like this, whether it's because the wife doesn't want to lose the financial stability, or because they do have a very toxic relationship, or this love-hate dynamic that was going on. We saw this in Sarah Boone's case as well.
Now let's talk about divorce filings. We already mentioned the one in 2018, but there was also another one filed by Danielle back in 2017 after she discovered one of Michael's affairs. However, Michael threatened her financially, saying that he would leave her homeless, take away the house, take the kids, and move back to Cleveland. Feeling trapped and without financial support, Danielle agreed to take him back, but nothing changed. It only got worse. It makes you wonder, why do people stay in situations like this?
It makes you realize why they actually stay in situations like this, because of the financial strain. That's like a part of financial abuse. It's like part of domestic.
Attorney Conlon told the jury that they would hear from Danielle herself in her own words.
This was foreshadowing that Danielle was going to testify.
Right. So when Danielle took the stand, the jury would hear all about the escalating incidents of violence. Attorney Conlon ended her opening statement by asking the jury to keep an open mind and wait to hear all the evidence before reaching a verdict.
Which is actually what they should always be doing, and what I like to do as well, and what we want all of you to do when you're listening to these cases. And then, of course, give your opinions in the comments, kind of like you're the 13th juror in this case. I wish we could show you the entire trial, but I think we would be here for this video would be a week long. But we'll give you as much information as we can so that you can give us your take on it.
We're going to start with the prosecution and what they presented to the court. They began their case by calling Officer John Stanford from the Winter Park Police Department. As one of the first responders at the scene, he told the jury that when he arrived at the Redlick household, he noticed blood smears and clear signs of cleanup.
He also provided all the information we already told you about the crime scene, and that is where we got all of that information about what the house looked like when they first got there.
The officer said he approached the primary bathroom and noticed a dark shadow behind the door. He announced his presence and ordered the person to come out slowly. That's when he saw Danielle Redlick, who appeared upset and was still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher. At first, she seemed visibly upset, but within minutes, her demeanor changed. The officer described her as nonchalant and uncooperative.
However, on cross-examination, the defense questioned the officer about whether Danielle's shock could have been mistaken for being nonchalant. And as we know, everyone acts differently in a traumatic situation. Officer Sherry Slaughter, and yes, that is her real last name. For a homicide investigator, it's quite funny. Slaughter. She was outside the home with Danielle. When she arrived, she didn't appear to be upset or distressed at all, but she was bleeding from one of her wrists and she seemed annoyed. She described taking photos of Danielle's injuries on her hands, her arm, and her head, but she didn't take any pictures of Danielle's wrist because she said that Danielle would not allow it.
Next on the stand was Dr. Kristen Vandervelde from the Orlando hospital. She testified that she observed a bruise on Danielle's left arm when she was brought in. Danielle also had a 4-centimeter laceration on her wrist, but it was superficial and not actively bleeding. Dr. Vandervelde noted that Danielle didn't have any visible injuries to her head, nor did she complain of head pain. Her pupils were normal with no signs of neurological trauma. Danielle had full range of motion in both her hands and wrists. In short, Dr. Vandervelde's testimony suggested that Danielle was not significantly injured.
And the reason this doctor is mentioning Danielle's head is because Danielle claimed that when her and Michael were first arguing that night, he actually came up behind her and hit her in the head. And that kind of kicked off everything that happened next. Then the jury heard from Detective Pamela Warr. with the Winter Park Police Department. She questioned Danielle at this scene and was able to obtain the whereabouts of the minor children and find someone to take temporary custody of them. Detective War also interviewed family and friends to gather background evidence on the state of Danielle and Michael's marriage. The detective interviewed Danielle at her home to collect a DNA sample, and she described Danielle as unhappy to find out that there was an ongoing investigation. Apparently, Danielle really thought that this was just going to wrap up quickly and she could get back to her life, but that's not what happened. At this point, when the detective was speaking with her, this is back when Danielle was still alleging that Michael had stabbed himself in the chest, the detective described Danielle as agitated. While searching the home, she ends up discovering Danielle's journal, which had an entry titled, "Forgive me for all my wrongdoings." This seemed to point to Danielle admitting that she killed her husband. She also found an email from Danielle to Michael on his work computer complaining to him about the things she wasn't happy about. During the investigation, Detective War compiled a timeline of events between Michael and Danielle. On the day of the incident, Michael went to work as usual. On his way home at 4:42 p.m., he stopped at a liquor store to purchase alcohol. After he got home, he then left for his son's baseball game. After the game, his son Sawyer went to a friend's house for a sleepover. According to the friend's mom, Danielle seemed distracted the entire time that she was at Sawyer's game. The following day, the friend's mom received a message from Danielle asking if Sawyer could stay with them longer, possibly another day, due to what Danielle described as a family emergency.
According to the records of the Meet Mindful website, Danielle created her account in December of 2018, identifying herself as separated. Her profile described her as someone looking for a partner who was passionate and full of life, with a good sense of humor and shared values of love. The last message Danielle received on the site was on January 8th, 2019, 3 days before Michael's death. There were no messages sent or received on January 11, 2019 through the website. However, Danielle had already started communicating with several men through text messages on her phone. Notably, she was logged into the website just an hour before she called 911 to report Michael's death.
So basically, she was on this app looking through her messages. She might not have been sending anything, but she was on there. Then the jury heard from the prosecution's forensic blood pattern experts. There are 3 primary bloodstain pattern categories: passive, spatter, and altered. And it's kind of self-explanatory, but on the other hand, I like to learn new things. I also like to teach new things in these videos. So passive would be if you had a wound and you were walking around and it was just passively dripping and you would get those little round blood droplets. We've seen that many, many times. Then if you had spatter, that's what we see when there's an impact that takes place. So if someone hits someone, the blood sprays onto the wall. That is blood spatter. And then there's what's called altered. And that means that we can't determine what they looked like because someone did something to them. It could be on accident, like you slid or slipped in blood. It could be on purpose, like you cleaned it up and diluted it with water, but somehow those stains are altered. That's what it means. The forensic analyst noted that the blood on the scene had been altered. The scene was tampered with by Danielle cleaning up the blood, which was still drying when he arrived on scene. The bloodstains were diluted, wiped, and smeared with a mop and towels. Michael's socks were saturated with blood, which indicated that he was upright and walking around through his own blood before finally succumbing to his injuries. Danielle had gone out that night to get herself some food from McDonald's. The food containers had blood smears on them as well, and the forensic expert testified that there were extensive cleanup attempts inside that home. The majority of the blood came from Michael's shoulder wound, but there was also blood spatter on a broken door frame outside of the bedroom, where Michael allegedly kicked in the door. And this was from the day before when they got into that argument about the text messages and he stole her phone. Then he walked back to the living room where he finally collapsed. So apparently he had not been dragged. See, that is why these experts and listening to all the evidence is so important before making a judgment call. But this was still the prosecution's case. They were showing that Danielle cleaned the scene to alter the narrative.
Next, the jury heard from John Keene, one of Redlick's neighbors who testified against Danielle. He said he lived directly across from Michael and Danielle and had witnessed frequent tension and friction between them. Keene described Danielle as a consistent aggressor who always seemed to be looking for something to fight about. In contrast, he described Michael as passive, often trying to appease Danielle by giving in to her demands. He also noted that during the times when Michael and Danielle were separated, Michael remained a very involved dad, coaching his son Sawyer's sports teams and regularly picking up the children for visitation. Another prosecution expert, digital forensic investigator James Montgomery, testified that he recovered over 40,000 pages of data and text messages from Danielle and Michael's phones. He noted that Danielle had deleted some of those messages and was unable to recover them. According to the data, Danielle's phone showed that she successfully called 911 at 9:28 a.m.
But back at 7:20 a.m., there were several text messages with a woman named Marcia English. This was Sawyer's friend's mom, where he was at a sleepover. And this is a text message where she's asking if he could stay for a family emergency. But what this implies at the time is that she knew that Michael was dead, and she still waited another 2 hours before calling 911. After calling Marcia, she exchanged messages with a man named Mark that she met on Meet Mindful. She had talked to him at 10:30 a.m. the morning of the murder and again at 3:32 p.m. The medical examiner also testified to what we already told you that she found during the autopsy. But under cross-examination, the defense asked her whether the bruises on Michael's body could have been caused by Danielle pushing him away, suggesting a possibility that could support her claim of self-defense. And the doctor confirmed that that was plausible. And now for the more personal witnesses for the prosecution.
The prosecution also called Peter Diebel, a close friend of Michael's, to testify against Danielle. He said he was much closer to Michael than Danielle, describing his interactions with her as polite but formal. One day, on the day of the murder, Peter was sitting in a lawn chair next to the field where Michael was coaching Sawyer's game. He described Michael as a dedicated father who loved being involved in his son's life. Danielle sat next to Peter during the game, which he said was unusual. She mentioned that she wasn't feeling well and had to take some nighttime cold and flu medicine. Peter described her as less animated than usual and seemingly off that day. After the game, Peter walked with Michael to his car. He said Michael also seemed distracted, and that was not quite like him.
Well, yeah, neither one of them were their normal self. They had just had an argument. She just egged his car. Remember that whole thing was going on right before they left. But the reason they mentioned the flu medicine was kind of weird to me. Like, what was that about? Was he suggesting that she was trying to set up some kind of like, oh, I'm out of it?
Right. Maybe she was on a lot of nighttime flu medicine.
Interesting.
The prosecution final witness was Danielle and Michael's daughter, Jaden. As the prosecution had stated from the beginning, Jaden would be testifying against her mother, a significant and very emotional move. Jaden told the jury that her parents had a toxic and unhealthy relationship. She described herself as being especially close to her father, sharing many activities together. She said her mother was the root of most of the family arguments. Jaden was aware that her father had been dating another woman when he moved out of the family home, but she said that their relationship had ended by that time he moved back in. She explained that her father returned to be closer to the children and to try to work on the marriage. At first, things seemed to be improving, but tensions eventually returned and grew worse leading up to the night of the stabbing. Jaden said the last time she saw her father was the night he was killed. She left to stay with a friend that evening because her parents were fighting once again.
When describing her relationship, Jaden stated, "My dad and I were very close. We particularly did everything together. He took me out on daddy-daughter dates all the time. We were very close. I told him everything." When asked about her relationship with her mother, she testified her mother was very toxic and manipulative. She described the relationship between her and her parents as very toxic, tumultuous, and very rocky. Yeah, it was not a good relationship at all. Very rocky, she said. And then she testified that her mother was the primary source of the friction, which you already mentioned, but she went into detail. And because of her age, they didn't allow cameras and they just allowed like the audio to be played.
Jaden testified that Danielle could never let things go and always found reasons to argue with her father. She said it was rare to see her father get upset or angry. The night he died, Jaden said her father texted her, telling her he loved her and that he wished she didn't have to see him that way, referring to him as being drunk. Those were the last words they ever exchanged. She didn't respond to this message. It's something that she regrets to this day. The next day after her father had died, Jayden received a text from her mom telling her that she was dealing with something at the house and that it would be best if she stayed with her friend another night. Jayden didn't speak to her mother for a few days after that, until Danielle was released from the hospital. When she finally asked her mother what happened to her father, Danielle's response was strange. She told Jayden the autopsy report said that he had a heart attack. Of course, Jayden now knows the truth, that her father died from blood loss caused by a stab wound to his shoulder inflicted by her mother.
And the autopsy report never said that he died from a heart attack either. So it seems like, according to Jayden, Danielle had lied. And the whole time that she was on the stand, Jayden avoided eye contact with her mom while Danielle cried throughout her daughter's testimony. The two had an estranged relationship at the time of the trial, with Jayden blaming her mother for her father's death, and rightfully so. I think this would be a lot for a young adult to deal with. No matter how old you are, this would be very traumatic. I also need to point out that there were text messages from that night where Jayden was saying how much she loved her mother, how scared she was for her mother. So it was kind of like she changed her tune after the fact. Well, if now you know the truth that your mom was responsible, whether or not self-defense, maybe that would change your mind. But I did want to mention that. But we still are on the prosecution's case. On cross-examination by Danielle's attorney, Jayden admitted that on the night he was killed, before she left for a friend's house, her father was extremely drunk. She described his demeanor as different and upset. Before she left that evening, she said she poured out her father's alcohol and threw out the bottle. It was the last act that prompted the apology text from her dad later. Now it was the defense's turn to present their witnesses and their argument to the jury. But instead, the defense began their case by making a motion to the court for what's called a directed verdict, for a judgment of acquittal. And the defense usually makes this request in a murder trial like this before presenting its case. Typically, this happens after the prosecution is finished presenting all the evidence, and this is an attempt to essentially get the case thrown out.
Danielle's attorney argued that the prosecution had failed to present enough evidence to prove Danielle's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Attorney Conlin asked the judge to dismiss the case, claiming that even if everything the prosecution presented was true, it still wasn't enough to legally justify a conviction. If the judge had agreed, the case would have been dismissed, and the defense wouldn't have needed to present any evidence.
However, it's actually rare for judges to grant a directed verdict or a judgment of acquittal, especially in a serious case like a murder. And this case was no different, and the judge denied the defense's motion after hearing arguments from both sides.
Immediately after the ruling, the defense made a bold move. They called Danielle Redlick to the stand. Up until that point, Danielle had been mostly stoic throughout the entire prosecution's case, only breaking down in tears during her daughter Jayden's testimony. She remained composed as family, friends, neighbors, and acquaintances described her as toxic and the aggressor in her dysfunctional relationship with Michael. However, it's worth noting that many of these stories were told in hindsight, through the lens of the belief that she had allegedly murdered her husband.
Exactly. And that is what we have all heard today up until now. It was up to Danielle to either refute or explain this evidence. It was a huge risk putting Danielle on the stand and allowing her to testify in hopes that she could rehabilitate herself. Defense attorneys usually avoid putting their clients on the witness stand in a murder trial because it can be very risky. Once the client testifies, they're opened up to brutal cross-examination by the prosecution, which can make them look guilty or even unreliable. The lawyer might also worry that the client could say something that would hurt their case, even by mistake.
However, similar to what we saw in Sarah Boone's trial, when a defendant is arguing a battered wife's self-defense claim, especially without a lot of physical evidence of actual altercations, it's often crucial for the wife to testify. In cases like this, the defense might feel it's essential for the jury to hear directly from Danielle. Her personal story and emotions could help them understand the fear and trauma she experienced, something that may not be as clear through evidence alone.
Also, testifying in this kind of case can help the jury understand why she would need to act in self-defense. It would turn out in this case that Danielle was an outstanding witness. She was on the stand for over 4 hours on 2 different days of this trial, and she gave the impression of a reliable narrator, unlike Sarah Boone, who only made things worse on the stand. Danielle took the stand with her graying hair on top of her head arranged into a librarian-style bun. At this point, she had a tired and worn appearance. The years that Danielle spent behind bars since her arrest had not been kind to her. She looked far older than her 48 years of age, and I think this had partially to do with the fact that, her roots were growing out. She can't access hair dye in prison. Like Sarah Boone, she had previously turned down a plea offer for manslaughter with a 10-year sentence. She took a huge risk going to trial and had everything on the line. And here's what her attorney asked her.
Ms. Redlick, on January 11th, 2019, did you stab your husband?
I did. Yes.
Why?
He was suffocating me. I couldn't breathe, and he had me pinned down.
Can you explain more?
I was scared, and I was just in fear for my life. He had thought he snapped, and I could die.
Why were you in fear for your life? Why did you think that you could die in that circumstance?
Just how he had me pinned down, and I couldn't breathe, and so just the look in his eye, his anger, and I couldn't get away.
You're trying to get away?
I was.
You're trying to use something besides a weapon to get away?
Yes.
Do you have any choice but to use a weapon to get away?
No.
How many times did you stab him?
Once.
Is this the first time that your husband had ever attacked you?
No, but it was one of the worst, I'd say, scariest.
Prior instances of physicality between yourself and your husband, are those things that you were aware of prior to January 11th, having experienced them yourself?
Yes.
Are those things that informed your decision or your awareness of your fear
Yes.
that you testified to on January 11th?
Yes.
Danielle told the jury that she first met Michael when she was 22 years old. At the time, he was married to her mother, who was battling an aggressive form of breast cancer. Their relationship was forged under excruciating circumstances. After her mother's death, the dynamic between Michael and Danielle shifted. What started as familial connection eventually turned into something romantic, and later deeply problematic. First, Danielle explained the obvious power imbalance in their relationship. Michael was more than twice her age and held significant financial and emotional influence over her. He was a much older, well-established man who had been present during one of the most vulnerable periods of her life, right after her mother's death. Michael also had the financial security to offer her a better life, something that many people in her position might find it hard to refuse. This dynamic gave Michael considerable power over Danielle. While she was still a young woman navigating adulthood, she was far less equipped to recognize or resist the control that was starting to form between them.
Experts say that relationships like this, built on such uneven power dynamics, often lead to manipulation. When Michael essentially offered Danielle a life free from financial struggle in exchange for marriage, it may have seemed like a tempting opportunity. Still, it laid the groundwork for a transactional type relationship, one built on dependency, not equality or mutual respect. And this dependency became dangerous over time, as Michael always felt like he held all the cards: financial, emotional, and even social. Fast forward 18 years later, and it's no surprise that the relationship had become tumultuous and even physically violent.
When one partner holds disproportionate power over the other, conflict is almost inevitable. Over time, feelings of resentment can build. Michael may have felt entitled to control Danielle's actions, while Danielle may have felt trapped, stuck in a life that she had grown accustomed to but built on unequal terms. When started as control, eventually evolved into aggressive and violent behavior, as both of them tried to assert their roles in the relationship. As Danielle grew older and more independent, she began to resent Michael and, at times, acted out against him aggressively. These moments weren't hidden. They were played out in front of family, friends, neighbors, and even strangers. Danielle explained to the jury that, in the end, the power imbalance created a toxic dynamic that spiraled way out of control and ultimately led to Michael's death.
Danielle explained to the jury how Michael had worked for the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Cleveland Browns while they were still in Ohio. She didn't want to move with him when he got the job with the Memphis Grizzlies in Tennessee, as all of her family still lived in Ohio. But Michael devised a plan to convince her to move. Let's listen.
At some point, did he leave Cleveland?
He did.
Did you guys leave together?
Yes. Well, no, not initially.
Tell the court how that came about.
Well, he was pretty ambitious with his career at that point. He had practiced law for 13 years and went back to school later in life to pursue his passions in sports. And so that's when he started to work for, the Cleveland Browns and the Cavaliers and professional sports teams. And he was looking for other opportunities, and he was moving up in the industry pretty quickly. So there was an opportunity that came upon him to move with the Memphis Grizzlies, an NBA team in Memphis, Tennessee. And he was excited about it, and he actually got the job, and it was a big move up for him.
At the time when he got the Memphis job, were you guys living together?
We were.
Was it your siblings there as well, or was it just you and Michael?
My sister was there, my younger sister. Yes.
So when he gets the job, do you move together, or does he move on his own?
He asks me to move with him, but at that point, I hadn't really disclosed to my family that we were actually seeing each other. So I wasn't entirely comfortable with it, just because he had been with my mother, and it was just kind of a little bit weird. So I told him no, that I wanted to also stay back with my family. My entire family lived in Cleveland, so I wasn't willing to do that at that point.
And do you remember what year this would have been?
2000-ish.
2000?
Yes.
Okay. At some point, did that change? Did you make it to Memphis?
Yes, at that point, he was buying me plane tickets just about every weekend. And so he was flying me to Memphis and show me around. And so I think after a year of that, one time he picked me up at the airport, and he said he had a surprise, and he took me to a place called Mud Island, where it's a beautiful neighborhood on the Mississippi River in Memphis. And he pulled up to a home, and he went inside, and he said, "I bought this for us." And it was a beautiful house. It had a pool, and it was on the river. And so from there, I went ahead and made the decision to go ahead and move to Memphis.
This didn't go over well with Danielle's family, who had just learned that Michael and Danielle were romantically involved. She said it was odd how they got together, but the relationship was happy and they enjoyed their time together. I can see how that's manipulative, like all these fabulous material things, and she was still young when they met.
Michael was well connected in the community, and he got Danielle a job in the radio industry, which made her happy. It would take a long time before alcohol became an issue in their marriage. Let's hear her explain that now.
He would get physical when he was angry, very angry, or if he drank too much. A lot of manhandling kind of thing.
Can you describe to the jury what you mean by that?
Just grabbing me by the arms a lot, sort of a controlling nature. Sort of dominating at times, slam me up against the wall, kind of stuff like that.
There ever times when it was more than just grabbing you?
Yes.
What was the first time that you can recall something happening that's more than just grabbing you?
Well, actually, the first time would have been back in Cleveland. There was one incident. We were coming back from a concert. I had saw an ex-boyfriend at a concert, and he was accusing me of wanting to have gone to the concert with the ex, and we sort of got into an argument about it. And I remember I made an offensive comment, which I wouldn't make today. I called him. I said at least he wasn't Jewish and cheap. And he backhanded me in the face and mouth, and my mouth started bleeding and my nose started bleeding. And we were in the car at this point. And so when I got to the red light, I wanted to get out of the car. And he grabbed me, and I grabbed him back, and we kind of just went back and forth in the car, and we actually got pulled over.
Danielle told the jury about an incident that happened earlier in their relationship, back when they were still keeping their involvement a secret from her younger sister and family. She explained that Michael had grown up around certain bigoted attitudes that deeply bothered him, and he would react violently toward her when she made inappropriate comments. As Danielle explained this, it was clear that she blamed herself for this reaction, implying that his violence was a response to her behavior rather than taking full accountability for his actions. This dynamic hinted a pattern where Danielle may have internalized the blame for Michael's outbursts.
This would happen a lot throughout their relationship, where Danielle would try to explain away his behavior and blame it on something that she said or did or on alcohol. Alcohol became a big issue throughout the relationship and later their marriage. Danielle described another incident that happened still prior to their marriage, but after she went public with the relationship and lived in Memphis.
He was coming home and he was pouring a drink each night. And I was still pretty young at that point, so I grew up in a house where you eat dinner every night. And I noticed that Michael, when he would drink, he would skip dinner. And so he was doing this by the third night. I started to wonder, are you going to keep doing this? I think I'm just going to go ahead and, if you're not going to eat dinner, I'm just going to go down to the river. There's some, a city walk where they have some shops and eateries and stuff. And when I said that, he got irritated and said, "What, are you mad because I don't want to have dinner with you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, kind of at this point," because I said, "How's the wallowing working out for you?" I said something sarcastic. And I went to head to the door to leave, and he was near the door and he moved in front of the door. And I tried to shove past him. And I feel like at that point, he raises his fist and he just crossed me in the face. And I feel like, I don't know, like he took out every frustration that he had that week on me. And the next thing I remember was actually laying in his lap, and he was stroking me and he was apologizing. He was crying. And I had looked down and I had blood all over me. And he was telling me how sorry he was, that he's going to take me out to a nice dinner tomorrow. And he wanted to go ahead and take care of me, let him take care of me that night.
This is when Danielle noticed her tooth was chipped, and she told him she needed to go to the doctor for medical care. He told her to wait until the next day to get medical treatment, and she called in sick and told her work a lie that she got into a car accident. Now, this was the time he took Danielle to his team doctor to look at her face. It was Michael that told her if she went to the regular doctor, he could go to jail over the incident and lose his job, and then he wouldn't have a way to support her. Danielle felt responsible for whatever would happen next, so she kept the real cause of her injuries a secret. Despite the increased violence, she felt like the relationship still had a lot of good in it, and she felt like Michael cared for her and loved her. It helped that he would always be apologetic and promise to never do it again. Don't they always say this, though? She felt the relationship was still worth pursuing, and she loved him. I also want to point out that before trial, the judge also prohibited the defense from presenting evidence related to Michael's intoxication and allegations of prior aggressive behavior. This included testimony from a woman who claimed that Michael had sexually violated her 10 years earlier, and she only came forward to the police after his death. Danielle's defense team argued that Michael had kept letters in his UCF desk from people who were aware of this alleged violation, suggesting an ongoing pattern of aggression towards women. However, the state contended that this evidence could only be used if the defense could prove that Danielle knew about this allegation before Michael's death, and she apparently did not.
Their daughter Jaden was born in 2003, and they married in 2005 in Memphis. After Jaden's birth, they were both happy with the family they had created. Danielle described Michael as a big fish in a new city, and their lives felt fun and exciting. She enjoyed all the perks that came with being Michael's wife and believed those benefits outweighed the bad parts of the relationship. But when Michael became violent, Danielle would always find a way to blame herself for his behavior. She convinced herself that she had caused it, or that she could prevent it by being quieter or more agreeable. Of course, that wasn't true. By 2008, when their son Sawyer was born, it was becoming harder and harder to hide the dysfunction in their relationship. The cracks were showing, and the toxic dynamic between them was no longer something that could be ignored. Unbeknownst to Danielle, Michael had been struggling with sexual dysfunction for years and had been using Viagra to maintain their physical relationship. Eventually, their sex life came to a halt, prompting Danielle to confront Michael and ask him about it. She discovered he had an unusual low level of testosterone and had lost almost all his libido.
Danielle learned that Michael had been dealing with this burden all alone. He was scared that she would leave him because of their significant age gap and not being able to perform anymore. She assured him that she would never be so shallow to leave her husband over a medical issue. So she began doing research for him and found some groundbreaking treatment options, including taking testosterone supplements and a new drug that could be injected directly into Michael's you-know-what, which would allow him to have an erection for a set period of time. I recently learned from a TikTok video that this injectable medication is how individuals that are paralyzed are able to have intercourse, in case you wondered. But unfortunately, in Michael's case, it eventually came with other unwanted side effects that she described to the jury.
How is that affecting you? How is that affecting your relationship with him? Arguments you would have, things like that?
His behaviors just continued he wasn't the Mike that I met. His behaviors just were bizarre. I think I would liken it to, I thought it was like this kind of sophomoric juvenile male type behavior where he was sort of treating me like an object. But alongside that, there was a lot of aggression and it would become hostile.
Can you explain the sophomoric stuff that you're referencing?
Vulgar comments, like I'm a piece of meat, I'm an object, I'm his property. Some of it would be, I guess he would portray that it was kind of like lust or something, but to me, it wasn't appropriate. It wasn't okay. He was getting hostile and he was actually hurting me often during these episodes.
Are you saying that physically would harm you?
Yes.
Is this while you're being intimate or in another
or
manner?
He's being sexually aggressive, yes. Or there were other instances where it would just come out of the blue, like perhaps I can tell things were bothering him.
Danielle gave an example of a time when she left a box of tampons on his side of the sink in the bathroom. And Michael, in his insecurity, thought that this meant she was questioning his manhood and implying that he had a use for them. So he threw them at her head. And the next thing she knew, he was choking her out. Let's hear her explain this in her own words.
Can you show the jury how, with your hands, do a demonstration of how?
He just came up behind me and yanked me really hard and pulled me close to his body, and to the point where I couldn't breathe, and he cut off my air. And basically, it was choking me out. I started to pass out. I remember falling, and I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, is he going to kill me? And I remember reaching up, and I fell to my knees. And the next thing I know, I was sort of aware, and I was looking up at him, and he was just staring at me with this like surprised expression on his face. And he reached out his hand and he said, "I'm sorry." And I just crawled away from him into a corner, and I was really frightened at that point, and I couldn't believe it.
Can you describe the look on his face that you just referenced during this incident?
Well, after the fact, he looked stunned and surprised at himself, and remorseful at that point.
How did it go from there? Did you guys move on from that? Was there any next?
Well, we moved on in the sense that we still lived in the same home and were raising two kids together, but I was getting more concerned about these behaviors. They weren't improving. Alcohol was becoming a real issue. I started to drink more at that point. And I think
we're still in Indianapolis.
Yes.
2012, 2013.
Yep, about that.
Okay.
And so I think it was just exasperating things. The arguments over this same issue kept repeating itself. And there were a few other, the violence increased.
One thing Danielle did while testifying was humanize herself by admitting to facts that didn't necessarily make her look good. She didn't try to explain away every piece of evidence against her, nor did she paint Michael as a monster or herself as an angel. She explained that she believed her attempt to address Michael's medical issues had actually made things worse for their relationship. She also acknowledged that both she and Michael were drinking far too much and expressed concern about how it was affecting their children. Her honesty and self-awareness appeared to resonate with the jury.
Exactly, because I think so many people struggle with very similar things. And I think that in any relationship, not just toxic ones, your relationship can over time, you let things slide and you don't address them. And that's very detrimental because then those things build and build and build. And the fact that she wasn't sitting on the stand and pretending like she had done no wrong actually made her very relatable. It's almost like she was talking to a friend.
Right. Another reason why communication and therapy are very important.
Exactly.
At the same time, Danielle explained the dynamics of their relationship in a sad but matter-of-fact way. She shared the reasons behind the escalating altercations and why she continued to endure it. Eventually, they moved to Florida, but the violence became more frequent. By then, it was also happening in front of their children.
There was a time when Michael would even sadly violate Danielle sexually while she was sleeping, and this was the final straw for her. Michael's sexual dysfunction was creating feelings of inadequacy and frustration for him, things that she wasn't even feeling. It was all in his own mind. For Michael, this led to insecurities about his masculinity and his ability to fulfill traditional roles in their relationship. Since the relationship was already rooted in an imbalance of power, his inability to perform sexually compounded his need to control Danielle in other ways in order to maintain that sense of power and dominance in their marriage.
When Michael began taking synthetic testosterone to address his ED, it led to significant changes in mood, behavior, and temperament. Testosterone replacement therapy can sometimes cause increased aggression, irritability, and mood swings. If Michael was already struggling with issues of control and dominance, the introduction of synthetic testosterone may have intensified these tendencies, making him more prone to angry outbursts or possessive behaviors. Michael's frustrations with his own body led him to lash out at Danielle, blaming her for his inadequacies and projecting his feelings of failure onto her. As his struggle with sexual dysfunction worsened, his fear of losing control over Danielle, both emotionally and sexually, grew stronger, causing his behavior to become more volatile.
These behaviors caused Danielle to tell Michael that he had to leave the family home. It got too much for her, especially with the kids around. So he would have to go away for a few months and then he would move back in with his family, stating that he missed his children. He did this for 18 months, back and forth, again and again. During one of their separations, they agreed they would both independently seek therapy and they would independently go to AA meetings to deal with their individual drinking problems. But at one point, Michael mentioned to Danielle that men were going to hit on her at these meetings and she needed to watch out for that type of behavior. Now, this began to make her wonder if this was something that Michael was doing at the meetings he went to without her there. So that's when she decided to do some snooping, and she looked at his home computer and found emails he was exchanging with another woman that he met at one of these meetings, which seemed to indicate they were having an affair. Danielle confronted him with this evidence, and of course, he denied it. He said that it hadn't become physical yet. However, at one of the next meetings, Danielle and this woman ended up having a conversation where the woman admitted it was a sexual physical relationship and it was ongoing. This is when Danielle decided to file for divorce. Michael was evading the divorce service, and that's when he came over and she was vulnerable and he asked that they could save the marriage, and Danielle took him back in and dismissed her divorce filings. She wanted her family back together, even though she knew it probably would never be the same. I think this is a hard place for someone to be in. There's a lot of people that can relate to this, including myself, where you don't even want to be with the person that you're in a relationship with anymore, but you also want to keep the family together for the sake of the children. But you know what? In the end, it's always best to remove yourself from that situation because it's not worth the kids being in a toxic situation rather than just leaving. However, when she discovered that Michael was still seeing this woman that he met at that AA meeting, she decided that she should be allowed to pursue other relationships as well, and that they should just end things. That's when she joined the dating service, but she never went on in-person dates. She was merely using it as an escape and dipping her toes into the water.
Their fighting had escalated once again. Danielle told the jury about an incident where Michael pushed her, causing her head to hit the corner of a dresser, leaving her bleeding. She went to the ER and was diagnosed with a mild concussion and needed stitches. But once again, she lied to the doctor, claiming it was an accident to protect Michael from facing any legal consequences. She also recounted another incident, one that was already part of the public record. That happened shortly before Michael's death. She described how Michael tried to run her over with his car, forcing her to jump into the bushes to avoid being hit. While she initially reported the incident, she later changed her mind and withdrew the complaint. Danielle explained to the jury that she didn't want Michael to face legal trouble that might affect his job or his ability to provide for their family.
Ms. Redlick, what I had asked is how you felt that he was weaponizing your divorce filing against you.
To stop paying bills and take the house from me and I wasn't super versed on the subject, so I believed him. I was worried about the house and the kids.
It was threats that kept Danielle trying to make her marriage work. She and Michael had started going on dates again, attempting to repair their relationship, but then she found a piece of paper hidden in a book. It was a speech Michael had written introducing himself as single and recently divorced, a statement that couldn't have been further from the truth.
It also said that sometimes God will give you another good woman after you've ruined the last one he gave you. She found this to be disturbing and insulting, especially since Michael had been married before her, so she was technically like a replacement, and this was before her mom too, so he had been married before both. And now he was finding another woman to replace her. They talked about what she saw, and Michael again apologized for hurting her. He explained that this was at a time when he wasn't sure that they would make it as a couple. Yet another excuse.
The last time Michael moved back was in the fall of 2018, just a few months before he died. He told Danielle that their finances were in bad shape and that they needed to sell the house. She agreed to let him move back so the children could have a good Christmas and that they could prepare the house to be put on the market. The plan was to figure out the future of the relationship after the house was sold.
But we know that didn't happen because on the evening of January 11th, 2019, Michael attacked Danielle for the last time. Nobody else was in that home at the time except for Michael and Danielle. The jury had to decide what happened that evening. Did Danielle negligently and callously stab her husband and then withhold care until he died? Or was she so traumatized by an almost 20-year abusive relationship that she hid in the bathroom for 11 hours, fearing for her life? Did she try to take her own life out of guilt for what she had done, or the guilt of taking her children's father? Danielle described that night in detail, how she was avoiding him for hours, even going to McDonald's, staying in her car, checking to see if he had cooled off or fallen asleep before coming back home, and how she was just eating her hamburger when he grabbed her phone and the hamburger and started asking her questions about Caesar again. And he takes a bite of her sandwich and spits it at her. Danielle was so upset that she grabbed the bag of food and left the room. But when she was leaving, she said, "You know what? I think I am going to go out with Caesar."
Then things escalated. Danielle said Michael came up behind her, grabbed her, and hit her in the head. She fell to the ground, ended up on her knees between the kitchen island and the counter. At that point, she explained that he pinned her down, making it impossible for her to get up. When she tried to move, he grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head into the countertop of the island. She was terrified. His face was red with anger, and she recognized that look. It's the same look she'd seen during past altercations when he badly hurt her. Michael began calling her names as he held her head down on the counter. He raised his fist in the air, and instead of punching her, he pressed it onto her face, grinding it against her skin. Then he started to smother her.
Well, I'm scared. I'm thinking I'm under attack.
What are you seeing from him? Are you able to see his face?
Yes, at that point, he's got a severe angry look, grimace.
Is that the same look that you've described previously?
It is.
Are you trying to talk to him? Is he talking to you?
I don't remember what he said. He was saying something. I know he called me a bitch, and he had his hand, he was holding my head down on the counter. So I can't see him entirely.
Using the bar in front of you, can you demonstrate how your head is positioned?
So he slams me down on the counter, and I'm pinned sort of this way, and he takes his hand and he's smashing my head. And so I'm just pinned up against the counter like this, and he's straddling my body here and has me pinned. And so my arm's here, and he's got his hand on my head, and he's holding it down.
Is your head actually touching the counter, or is it like you are right now?
I barely, yes, somewhat. He's pushing it as much as he can, but it's awkward.
So is the side of your head making contact with the flat surface?
Yes.
Okay. What's he doing with his other hand?
So he's standing above me here this way, and he cocks his fist back. I can see him, and he's acting like he's going to punch me in the face. And instead, he comes down and he grinds his fist into my face, and then puts his hands over both his hands over my hand and my nose, and he's pressing as hard as he can, smashing my nose in my face.
What do you do?
At that point,
Physically.
I can't really do anything. He's got me pinned and I can't move, and I'm trying to wiggle out.
Are you able to?
No,
Is there any conversation going on at this point?
I can't speak. No,
Are you able to breathe?
no. I tried to take like 3 or 4 breaths and I couldn't even get a breath.
When asked what she did next, Danielle explained that this time was different than other times. He was holding her down much longer. He was in a rage, and she felt that he had snapped. And this time, he was going to kill her. She was able to use her free arm to grab whatever she could reach to fend him off. There was a drawer in front of her that she knew was full of a bunch of kitchen utensils. This was happening very fast. Here's what she said happened next.
What's Michael doing at this point? Is he still holding you down?
He's holding me down.
Are you still trapped?
Yes.
You find the knife. You're able to open the drawer?
Yes.
You're able to grab the knife?
I pull it out. Yes.
How does it continue from there?
Pulled the knife out, and I don't know if he saw it, but he released my head, so I'm able to move.
Okay. How do you position? So you said that you're able to move a little bit. What position do you go into?
Just slightly more to the left, turning toward him.
Does he back away from you?
No.
Okay. Go ahead.
He says, "What, are you going to stab me?" And I take the knife and I position it and face it toward him.
What does he do at that point?
He immediately just goes for my chin and pushes me back, and I stab him at that point.
How are you positioned at the point of stabbing him?
Basically on the back of the island, and been pinned by him.
At that point, are you able to get out?
After I stabbed him, yes.
Prior to doing that, prior to stabbing him with a knife, are you able to remove yourself?
No.
Are you able to wiggle free?
No.
Are you able to get out without using a weapon?
No, I was trying.
Are you able to talk to him?
No.
What do you see in his demeanor after you believe he has observed you with the knife?
He's not fazed. And again, he's still on top of me and proceeds to push my head back again.
She explained that when she grabbed the knife, her intention was never to kill him, but to defend herself, to get away, to make him stop. She admitted to stabbing him once in an attempt to free herself. After she stabbed Michael, she ran into the bedroom and then into the bathroom to hide. She locked herself inside the small toilet closet. Before she knew it, he was yelling, and she was praying that he wouldn't get into the bathroom that she was in. Because many times before, even the day before, he had broke down a door. He broke the bathroom door the day before, and he'd even broken down their front door back in November. She didn't have her phone with her in the closet, so she was waiting until she didn't hear him anymore, thinking that he would just cool off. My question is, why didn't he call 911? I'm not trying to be insensitive, but she's locked in the bathroom hiding. He's clearly injured, but she doesn't think it's anything serious. It was just one stab wound, but he's out there with access to the phone. So I couldn't help but be curious what was happening, because he did walk around that house. There was bloody footprints that showed that. I'm just confused and surprised that he didn't attempt to run, go get help, or call for help.
Maybe he was already feeling the effects of the wound.
Well, that is right, because, I was just wondering, I can't help but think, could he have been saved? Could he have saved himself? I mean, it only takes a few seconds to dial 911, and then they would have rushed over there. And even with the medical examiner, she kind of almost acted like the lung wound wasn't that bad. Like if he had gotten medical treatment, he could have lived. But obviously, he did bleed out. It's just, in my point of view, the medical examiner made it seem like it wasn't fatal if he would have gone to the hospital. But I'm not a doctor, so I could have been mistaken or not understanding. But you were right, because Danielle hadn't heard anything in a while, so she popped her head out to see if the coast was clear, and she said that at least 15 minutes had gone by. That's not a long time, but possibly longer. And that's when she saw blood on the floor in the bedroom leading out of the room. So clearly, let's say it had been only 20 minutes had gone by. We don't know when in those 20 minutes he passed out. He could have been passed out in 5 minutes. As soon as she saw the blood, she was actually shocked, because she didn't think it was that serious.
That's when Danielle called out Michael's name, trying to see if he had left or if he was okay. That's when she found him sprawled out on the living room floor. At first, she thought he was being dramatic because he was just lying there, not answering her. But as she got closer and touched his face, she realized something was wrong. He wasn't moving at all. She placed her ear and hand on his chest to check if he was breathing, but there was nothing. Danielle said she panicked and went into shock. She started looking around and saw all the blood. Desperately searching for her phone, she tried to figure out what to do next.
Yeah, and I remember that's when she said she thought, oh my gosh, did he die? I just want to play that one part.
I was thinking, oh my gosh, did he die?
She lifted his shirt to see where he was injured, and she saw the wound was on his armpit area, and it was bleeding. So she tried pushing on it to make it stop, but it just bled more. She wasn't sure if the stab wound killed him or if it was the shock and he had a heart attack. To be fair, I think that this would be a very traumatic moment and you wouldn't be able to think clearly. Plus, they had been drinking a lot. Remember that Michael had taken Danielle's phone, so she didn't know where he put it. But soon she sees it blending in on the white couch. She picked it up and thought she dialed 911. We know that she dialed 911 twice and it never went through.
But when 911 wasn't working, she began life-saving measures, breathing into his mouth and trying to get a pulse. Nothing was working, and she didn't know CPR. Then she admitted that she made some really bad decisions after this.
You think? Because she erased her text messages with Caesar. She said it was because she was thinking about her kids and that Michael was dead. And we know that she must have also been thinking, oh my God, I killed him, right?
I would think so. She then cleaned the scene, or tried to. She said it was all irrational. She was actually confused as to how Michael could be dead. But the one thing she didn't do was call 911 again. But she did say she thought about it.
Unfortunately, it's not the thought that counts in a situation like this.
She admitted that she had hugged her husband's body and was laying with him for a bit and did some more cleaning.
Or altering the scene, depending on how you look at it. And it was at some point that she said, what am I doing? And she stopped cleaning. I think she realized there was way too much blood and she was only making the scene look worse. Finally, she said she sat down next to her husband and cried, just holding him. And eventually, she fell asleep beside him.
Danielle said she woke up around 7 a.m. and took a look at what she described as a horror scene. That's when she realized she needed to call 911. But instead of calling right away, she started thinking about her kids and how they would find out that their father was dead. That's when thoughts of self-harm crept in. She Googled how to do it and ultimately attempted it. She cut herself but claimed that a voice in her head told her not to go through with it, reminding her that her children still needed her. And it was at that moment that she realized what she was doing and finally decided to call 911 for help.
She claims she never got on any dating sites that morning, nor did she have any calls with anyone. That was the last thing on her mind, according to her. But she does finally call 911. When officers arrived, Danielle confessed to lying to them because she didn't want to implicate herself. Fair enough. And later she said, following her attorney's advice, she even lied to her children. Don't know what that means. But Danielle said that in the chaos, she had hoped that Michael had died from a heart attack, thinking if he did, she wouldn't be held responsible. During cross-examination, she admitted she had made up stories to serve her own interests, even admitting, in other words, that she wished he died from a heart attack so she would be cleared of blame. Danielle was done testifying, so the defense called 2 additional witnesses who shared their accounts of seeing Danielle with injuries prior to Michael's death. Jennifer Brown, a neighbor whose son played with Sawyer, testified that in 2018, she noticed a black and blue bruise on Danielle's face when she came to pick up her son. Danielle had been wearing a hat and sunglasses, and it was looking like she was trying to cover up the mark. The other witness was that doctor we talked about, Dr. Frederick Azar. He was the orthopedic surgeon who had previously worked for the Memphis Grizzlies, and he said he was consulted in private by Michael and Danielle after he hit her in the face, and he confirmed what we already described to you.
During closing arguments, the prosecution went first, highlighting Danielle's changing stories. They reminded the jury that she initially told authorities Michael had stabbed himself and may have died from a heart attack. The prosecutor argued that instead of getting help or performing CPR, Danielle let Michael bleed to death. She waited to call 911 until she had attempted to harm herself, only doing so once she realized she might be in serious trouble. The prosecution asked the jury to find Danielle guilty of second-degree murder, as well as the lesser included charge of manslaughter, in addition to tampering with evidence.
Then it was the defense's turn, and Danielle's other defense attorney on her team, Andrew Parnell, gave the closing argument. He told the jury that the Redlick marriage had a history of Michael hurting Danielle from before they were even married. And it was Michael's insecurities that led to violence against Danielle on the January 11th night, that Michael was hitting her, holding her down, and once again choking her. He was looking into her eyes as he attacked her, a look that she had seen many other times and feared for her life. But this time, Michael wasn't coming to his senses. He wasn't stopping. He had her trapped, pinned down, and was smothering her. And Danielle believed that she was going to die in her kitchen at the hands of her husband, who had already hurt her many times over the years. Attorney Parnell explained that throughout the years, Danielle would fight back, but mostly she would normalize her fights as part of their cycle, that an apology with flowery language would always follow. He told the jury how text messages showed that hours earlier, Jaden had to step between her mother and father and take a liquor bottle from him. She had never seen her father get upset before. He also showed text messages where Danielle was warning Jaden to stay in her room that night because Michael was in a violent mood. And those same messages showed that Jaden said she loved her mom and that she was scared for her. He reminded the jury that Jaden chose to leave that night because her parents' volatile and violent relationship. He asked the jury to find his client not guilty because of self-defense. Now, I said from the start of this video that this would be a shocking verdict, and that's because the jury came back with a verdict of not guilty on both counts, second-degree murder and manslaughter. That's right. They believed that Danielle was fighting back in self-defense when Michael was stabbed. And it wasn't that shocking for me to believe that because I do genuinely think that this was a very toxic relationship that was all around laced with manipulation on Michael's part to control. And of course, the testimony from the doctor that Michael had severely injured Danielle in the past. So I do think she believed that he would do it again, and she might lose her life. I also believe her when she said that she didn't think that just using a regular, ordinary, serrated kitchen knife was going to kill him. And I think it's very important that she did only stab him one time. They made sure to emphasize it was only once, because if you are going to kill someone or want to kill someone, you would usually stab them until you knew that they were dead. So they used that to show it was just once to get him off of her. I do think the jury got it right, but I also want to know what you think.
I think it's possible. I wish I was there. It's hard because we don't know the full story. Exactly. We only know what we could research. I don't know. It's interesting.
Now people have cameras in their home, so you would have to do it somewhere else.
But the jury did find Danielle guilty of tampering with evidence when she began cleaning up the crime scene.
Danielle's emotions were hard to contain. She burst into tears when she heard the jury's verdict. And through her sobs, Danielle turned to her attorney and she whispered, "Thank you." And during her sentencing hearing later in August, her now adult daughter made a request to the court, and it was read out loud by a clerk. But you could still tell that Jaden's words were filled with raw emotion. She expressed her wish for her mother to be permanently prohibited from contacting her and her brother. It read, quote, "The only reason I am not personally reading this statement is because I simply do not ever want to be in the room with Danielle ever again. I refuse to call her mother because she was never a mother figure to me." The letter went on to say, "You may all be fooled by the incredible mask this woman presents to you all, but I am not. My father did not get away in time, and I'm so worried for my brother. Judge, please make some kind of stipulation that Danielle not be allowed near myself and Sawyer. I suffer from nightmares, paranoia, and depression. I have the fear of being murdered. I lost everything at once, and it was broadcast to the world." She wrote about her father, emphasizing that he was not perfect, but he was kind and a gentle man who never laid a hand on anyone in their family. Danielle was audibly crying in the court while this letter was being read into the record. And this is tough because as a mother myself, I see it one way, that Danielle was probably like, this is my child. I raised her, I love her, and this is what she thinks of me. But their relationship clearly wasn't perfect, and the household was very volatile, but it would still hurt you to hear those words. And on the other hand, I could see being the child in this situation, knowing that my mother killed my father, and that would be very hard to deal with. So all around, this is a very heartbreaking situation.
After this, Danielle's attorney read letters of support from 6 character witnesses, including volunteers from a Christian ministry program she participated in while in jail. These letters highlighted Danielle's dreams of helping other women and ministering to those in need. One supporter wrote, "I believe Danielle had already paid a steep price and is eager and ready to start a new life." The judge declined to impose a no-contact order or prohibit alcohol use as part of Danielle's probation. Instead, she was required to undergo a mental health evaluation. Danielle was released from custody immediately and placed on 1-year probation.
The not guilty verdict came as a shock and disappointment to Michael's family and friends who believed that he did not receive justice. They felt that Danielle's actions, both during and after Michael's death, were indicative of her guilt. The fact that she delayed calling 911 and spent time trying to clean up the crime scene suggested to them that she was trying to cover up the murder, not someone who had acted in self-defense.
Michael's family spoke out against the verdict, expressing sadness and anger. They felt justice had not been served. They believed Michael had been victimized and that the jury's decision failed to reflect the reality of what happened. Friends and colleagues who knew Michael shared similar sentiments, describing him as a loving father and a respected professional who did not deserve such a tragic end.
For Danielle, the aftermath of the trial, though it spared her a murder conviction, left her with a fractured reputation and strained relationships with her own children, as well as Michael's side of the family. Her conviction for tampering with evidence, while a lesser crime, still came with legal consequences and further complicated her ability to regain any sense of normalcy. In the public eye, opinions were divided. Some saw her as a woman who had survived years of toxic relationship and finally snapped in self-defense. Others viewed her as manipulative, feeling that her claims of self-defense were a calculated effort to escape a murder conviction. And now it's time for you, as the 13th juror, to tell us your thoughts. Overall, the emotional toll of the case rippled throughout both sides of this family, leaving lingering questions about justice, abuse, and the tragic outcome of a relationship full of dysfunction. I really had problems back and forth with this case. Like, at moments I could see that it was probably self-defense, and then other moments I was like, I don't know. But one thing I want to say is, of course, from the outside, when they say like he's a loving father, he's, this successful person, but that's his persona to the outside world. That is not what happens when the door closes, when you're drinking, when your personality is altered. So as much as I believe that that was true, I think that people can have many different sides.
I do believe a lot of people know that there is a major vein running through your armpit.
I don't know that.
And the other thought I had was, let's just say it was, defensive to some degree. She stabs him in the perfect spot and goes, okay, good. I'm going to wait till you die. And at that point, it's murder.
I get it. I can see it both ways, honestly. Like I'm back and forth. I'm back and forth. We could sit here and debate it for hours. No one was there. If we could be a fly on the wall, I guess we would have a way different perspective because we would know exactly what happened in the moment. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for being here with us and hearing this tragic story. Give us your thoughts, and we will see you in our very next video.
Bye.
Bye.